Hello, Judy here from the Quilting Bee in Maslin, Ohio. And I wanted to share with you what I'm working on now. When I am cutting out here at my cutting table, I normally have at the end of my table this basket. And in this basket, I throw any of the end cuts, anything that's left over from my cutting. And it had gotten quite full. It was runneth over. And so I took out everything I could use for 5-inch squares, whatever it might be, for my collage. And I still had an awful lot in here. And I thought, okay, for the, I think, third time, I'm going to start a crazy quilt. And you can see I have started. I'm down to my last row. I'm doing a 4 by 6 square. So here's how I've gotten started, and I'm doing this video of it because I thought that might be an impetus to keep me on track and see this to the conclusion. So let me show you how I have gotten to where I am right now. All right, well, the first thing I had to do was decide on my center shape, and nearly all are some kind of a 5-sided shape, not necessarily even on any 2 sides, but just 5 sides. And you can free cut that, or I decided I wanted all of my center points to be the same. And I also decided I wanted them to all be the same color for whatever reason. So I made myself a little template, and this is what I use. There are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 sides, and I cut out my centers. I then decided I'm going to start with using a foundation piece. You do not have to, but I'm using a foundation piece because I am planning on doing decorative stitches. So you know, you either need to use some kind of a tearaway stabilizer when you're doing that, or a couple of layers of fabric. And so I thought I would save myself the stabilizers process and just go ahead with the foundation piece. What I learned as I was going into cutting my foundation pieces, since I had gone with a white center, and it's somewhat translucent because this is the fabric I use for collage foundations, I learned I could not use a scrap of fabric for my 9-inch square that had any kind of design on it. You can see through my centerpiece. So that meant I had to go with white, which would not have been my first choice, but that's the way it is. So I have my pieces cut out, and I then went to my basket and started pulling out strips. You do not have to do this. I just found that for me, it works best if I go through this step. And what I have on my table right now is what's left of the stash that I pulled out. And I didn't sort by color or design or anything like that. I sorted by length. So these are some of the ends that I've cut off from my previous squares. But these are my different lengths and the fabrics that sort of correspond to the length of a previous one. I have them in no special order. They are just the way they came out of the basket because I'm not planning on worrying about the order of the fabric. I have done all the rows I've done so far, and it was just whichever one was next of the length that I needed. So let's move on to going to the sewing machine. All right, so my machine is on. I am going to take one of my 9-inch squares, take one of my center pieces, and it can be laid anywhere at all. Toward the top, toward one of the sides. I nearly always will go within the middle, and I'm not paying any attention as to where the shapes are. I'm just putting it down on my foundation piece. And I'm going to start with one of my sides. So let me see what I might have. Let's trim the selvage off. And see what this might fit. Let me turn it towards you. Will fit there very nicely. And it's right sides together. I like to trim as much as I can rather than having it overlapping any more than it's going to naturally. So I have folded this back onto itself straight with the top edge to trim that little bit off to keep as little bulk as possible, or have as little bulk as possible. So I'm going to sew from this point to this point. And let's just go ahead and do that. I'm using a 1/4 inch seam. You can use whatever size you want. It does not matter. And I am pressing. That is the one thing with a crazy quilt. You do need to press every single seam, and finger pressing won't do it. You need it to be a true press. What I have done, and you cannot see it here, and I'm not going to move the camera, but to my right, on a little floating rolling storage unit, I have my wool ironing pad, my little mini iron. So all I have to do is turn my body and come over here and give that a little press. So that is my first piece on my center. I like to work clockwise. You can go counterclockwise, but I have found clockwise seems to fit my brain a little better. So now I'm going to be working on this side of my center piece. And yes, this will be long enough. Now again, unfortunately my surface is white and this is white. What? That is unfortunate. Let me put something under here so maybe you can see it a little better. So this is my centerpiece coming along here. So this piece has to start at the point of the fabric I just laid down and come over to the end of my centerpiece, but I have to make certain I am covering fabric all the way. So I've had to bring it in a little bit so that I am covering everything and not leaving any gaps. And again, I will fold back onto itself what I don't need and trim that off. So let's quickly get this sewn just as before, starting at one end, coming all the way down. And pressing. And I now have 2 of my sides done. This side of my centerpiece is along this plane. So my piece is going to go from this point down to this point. So let's see what, and I try, in fact, I will not use the same fabric that I've used. Every piece has to be a little different. So I'll turn this towards you and know that I'm starting up here and making certain I am covering my centerpiece. See, if I had planned this video, I would have started with other colors as my foundation, but it is what it is. Trimming as I go, and do it right here. These push buttons sometimes get ahead of themselves. I'm sure it isn't the operator. Again, I am pressing, and now I am working with this plane, this particular line of my centerpiece. So I'm moving into another row of fabric and, or another length. There I go. Again, folding back the fabric I don't need. And when I mentioned earlier that I had a little squares that I had trimmed off, this is just such a little square. I will say this, I'm going to put that in my little square packet because I may need it at the end for a corner. So I just, when I have an end piece like that, I just put it into whichever row length it would be appropriate for. And I will sew. Pressing. I try to not use any fabric that is wider than 2.5 inches. I have found that any wider than that, I don't get enough variety on my piece. So between 2.5, if you get too narrow, then of course by the time you've seamed on both sides, you aren't going to see the fabric. So between 2 and 2.5 seems to be a good guideline for the width of your strips. They don't have to be true all the way down, but they should be between 2 and 2.5 inches in width. Okay, let's try, see if you can, maybe I fold it under, maybe you can see a little better. This is my last edge, and so my next piece will go from this point down in this vicinity. So I'm losing most of that first one, aren't I? So let's see if this piece will fit there. I think it's going to. It's a little long. Let's see. Okay, trying not to waste any of my fabric. I stay as short as I can. Here is where my edge is. So that is the placement. There we go. And I'm not going to bother trimming off that little bit. Seam this up. And I'm going to just go on all the way around one more time.
It's a great big atlas, and I'm feeling down. When you get what you want, maybe I should start over. There's nothing left to want, I'll be at it again.
As you see, maybe you saw, I was tempted to bring this over here where the red is, but then I would have been beyond this end. So always check to make certain you are not seaming beyond the edge of a previous strip.
It's a great big atlas, and I'm feeling down. When you've got what you want, maybe I should start over. There's nothing left to want. Open letter again. You don't know what you want.
All right, now this piece, this little section needs a longer piece, and that will cover it just great. So, getting close to the end zone here. One last piece. Let's see if I can help you see this little bit that I need. So find something I haven't used. And, well, right here, I haven't used this piece. So I will trim this off and let this finish this square. Doing this is sort of a stroll down memory lane as I think of the projects I have finished using these different fabrics. Some of them I don't know what I use them on, I admit. And a couple of them I'm wondering what ever possessed me to go with that particular fabric, but you know, at different times we like different things. So here we are. It is all my sides are completely covered, and I can double check that from the back side, and I see that all my points, I have fabric going beyond. So what I will do now is trim this. I will trim it off true to my 9-inch square. Whether these blocks will end up 9 or will I trim them down to 8.5, I don't know yet. I'll have to see how true I've been, but I've tried to be fairly accurate. So that's what I will do next, is trim this down to where it is the same dimension as my foundation piece. So here I am, all trimmed up. This is our block that we have just completed. I am thoroughly loving them when I look on my board. I will mount this, not that they're mounted on the design board in any special order, just lets me keep track of where I am. After this is mounted, I will have 2 to do. I will finish those 2, and I will be back then for us to talk about embellishing, doing the fun part. Okay, I have finished my blocks, and I am on to embellishing. So if you think about a crazy quilt, you always see embroidery. And it occurred to me as I was working on this one, I think one of the reasons I never got any further than I did on my other 2 attempts was because I can't embroider. I would try. I would get a block made and put it in the hoop and try to do some basic embroidery stitches. I bought a book, Embroidery Made Easy. They lie to you. It is not easy. And so I think I would just get discouraged. And even though I knew I could do decorative stitches on my machine, I I've never done that. I've never gone beyond a zigzag stitch. So that was going to be a learning process, and I would just put it aside for another day. Well, that other day has been coming up, and so the other day when I took a break from doing the blocks, I decided to try to figure out how to get to the decorative stitches on this machine. And after about 6 or 7 videos, I finally learned. You press the icon that says decorative stitches. Nowhere in my manual did it say to do that. But anyway, I did do that, and the whole world of decorative stitches opened up to me. So I then had to do some choosing, because I thought, yeah, I can't use all of these, and some of them were very exotic. A lot of them were very tight, very satin stitchy looking, and I knew that I didn't want that kind of a stitch. So what I did was create a sampler, and you may not be able to see what I've done on this. I went with this fabric because it helped me keep things straight. Whatever works. But what I did on my, you know how we all have all these little starter squares, starter and ending squares. I just took one of those, doubled it up so that I had some thickness, and started practicing. Started using the different decorative stitches and determining which width and length I liked best. And then what I did, I put them onto my sampler with the number of the stitch so I can find it again, and the width and length that I used for the example that I have. So I have about 25, which should be plenty. And so I'm all set to go on my decorative stitches. Now, the one thing I did learn from one of the videos that I watched, if you have it, use your foot that has a groove in it on the back, on the underside. This enables your fabric to move smoothly over those sometimes bulky stitches. So that's my hint for decorative stitches. Another thing that we frequently would see on a crazy quilt would be embellishments, little trinkets or mementos, whatever it might be, that adds to the dimensions, adds to the interest of your square, of your block. So I looked around, and never having, or not for years, I'm not a garment maker. I don't have a lot of the little details that some of you may have. What I do have is from making rag dolls for our grandchildren, our granddaughters, a few years ago, and I made clothes for them. So I did still have a supply of some rickracs. Here, this is a lacy hem facing, things that I could use. You know, they're all smaller in nature. Some ribbons, and these little things, they're bows and or little flowers for children's clothing, and I use them on the ragdoll's clothes. And I don't have many buttons down here, but I did pull my buttons because some of them are interesting and might be nice on the quilt. Keeping in mind, if I'm going to use anything that is dimensional, especially a button or even these little flower buds, that will mean quilting it will probably need to be done on a domestic machine or on a long arm where the individual is manipulating the progress, as opposed to like the long arm we have at the bee. It's all computerized, and so that thing just goes back and forth, and heaven forbid it come upon some obstruction. So if Amanda is watching this, no, Amanda, I'm not going to expect you to do this on the long arm. But whether I'll use them, I don't know, but I've laid them out. So I thought, all right, where am I going to start? How am I going to start? And I looked at the supplies I had, and I had a partial bolt, if that's what you want to call these little cardboard things, of this red rickrack. And so I pulled one of my squares and put some red rickrack on it. Sewed it on with my off-white thread that I had on my machine. Did not like the white showing. That's where my handy dandy little seam ripper came into play. And I then threaded my machine with red for my top thread, and I was pleased with it. But then I thought, well, I'm not going to want to keep switching back and forth from thread to thread. So I pulled out any block that I thought I would like the red on, the red rickrack, and just started putting rickrack on them. And I think I have about 5 or 6. And then I ran out, and this is what I have left. Okay, that was a good plan. Now I have 5 or 6 in a beginner stack in my mind. So then I also had a partial roll, this kind of a thing, of this lacy stuff. So I put white back in my machine and thought, how far can I go with white? So I took that, and I really only had enough left for 2 squares. But that's where I am. Well, I then thought, okay, I'm going to jump right in and see what my embroidery stitches are going to look like. Well, I have been working on my crazy quilt and thought maybe I would share a few more hints with you of things that I have learned as I've been going along the process. First of all, and I may have mentioned this, but be sure that you slow your machine down a little bit when you're doing your decorative stitches. It will keep it smoother and prevent the bunching up that might occur as the machine's trying to go faster than is comfortable for whichever stitch you've selected. And I thought maybe you'd like to see some of the options that I have ended up with for my decorations on my different blocks. So let's look at a few examples of what I have ready to be quilted and finished. So let's look at those. Here I have just used some buttons. What I ended up realizing is that with me going with white for my center piece, it really sort of requests or asks for some embellishment. So that's what I am ending up trying to do. So I have put some little buttons here. Here's some lace, And that's really about all this one has. Well, no, here's a little piece of ribbon. So it doesn't take an awful lot. And then I went on to my decorative stitches. I work in blocks of 4. I'll pull 4 of my blocks out and do whatever I'm going to do on them, and then I do decorative stitches because, if you recall, I had said I'm going to use black for all of my decorative stitches. So rather than constantly with every square being needing to switch the color of thread, I'm working in 4s, just what I'm doing. And seems to be working for me because 4 is sort of my goal each day, is to get one more row done. And I'm doing a 4x6, so that's how that's going. Remembering that since I'm doing buttons and some dimensional embellishing, I will not be able to do this on a long arm. I'm going to have to do this on my domestic machine so that I can, probably I'll just end up stitching in the ditch, but it's so I can avoid getting in the way of, or my embellishment getting in the way of the quilting. Otherwise, you would wait and do things like this after it is quilted. All right, on this one, I have a little bit of everything. I have some rickrack. I have just some ribbon. Here's some lace. And in the center of this, I did a fussy cut. I used a fussy cut. So this butterfly was fussy cut out, and then with light steam seam on the back of it, I attached it to my block. So that's another way of adding some interest to your block. And this has just a little rosebud. Again, it's the sort of thing that I had available. Some lace. Oh, and rickrack again. So those are just a few things that you can do to give it a little life, give it a little interest. And I will be doing a quilt as I go when I get all of these embellished. And so I'll probably come back when I'm doing that and talk to you about that process using something of this nature. That's it. See you next time. Bye now.